The DCU is a very weird reboot in that it's both a hard reboot and a soft reboot to the DCEU, just depending on what part of the world. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and the rest of the Justice League are given complete reboots, but then there is what's known as a loose canon, projects from the DCU whose events vaguely occurred in the DCU. This includes Suicide Squad, The Suicide Squad, Peacemaker Season 1, and Blue Beetle. But what parts of these projects are canon and what parts aren't? Well, that's what I'll be discussing in this video. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and become a member of this channel in the noble tier or above for early access to videos. Thanks to these members in the king tier for the extra support. Going in order of release, Suicide Squad from 2016 was a very late addition to the list of loose canon projects, as James Gunn included it when mentioning those projects. We did already know of some castings that were canon, but as we can see from the appearances of Amanda Waller, Harcourt, and Economos in Black Adam or Shazam Fury of the Gods, there are entirely unrelated overlapping castings between the DCEU and DCU, even with non-canon at all appearances. As of right now, there is absolutely nothing exclusive to Suicide Squad that we know to be canon, but considering these castings originate there, Viola Davis as Amanda Waller and Joel Kinnaman as Rick Flag are canon castings to the DCU. Aside from that, I think the events of this movie will end up being the most vaguely canon to the DCU. The Suicide Squad was created in 2016, Waller and Flag were involved, and that is it. That said, there are things from this movie that are entirely non-canon. Superman is directly mentioned as the reason for the creation of the Suicide Squad, but Superman didn't debut until 2022, so if the Suicide Squad was created back then, Superman had nothing to do with it. The Flash appears, he almost certainly didn't exist yet. Ezra Miller as the Flash, Ben Affleck as Batman, and Jared Leto as the Joker are the castings we can say for sure confidently are not canon to the DCU. I could see them bringing back almost anyone else, maybe not Will Smith as Deadshot. All that in mind, I think Suicide Squad is so vaguely maybe canon to the DCU, and it's not even a good movie. I would not include it if you're going to do a DCU rewatch. Even in the DCEU, the Suicide Squad and Suicide Squad already barely felt connected anyway. Moving to the far more canon sequel, The Suicide Squad has events that are pretty much entirely canon. James Gunn has defined the canon of the DCU as the canon technically begins with the release of Creature Commandos. Nothing before is canon until it's specifically mentioned on screen. That said, technically none of the loose canon projects are canon at all, but if you want to watch them as a part of a DCU rewatch, you can. For the Suicide Squad, Project Starfish absolutely occurred. Viola Davis's Amanda Waller sent the Suicide Squad to Corto Maltese to protect America's secrets. Considering the project's name, we can assume that they fought Starro, and we know it culminated in Peacemaker killing Rick Flag. The confirmed to be canon members of the squad are John Cena's Peacemaker, Sylvester Stallone's King Shark, although he was voiced by D. Bradley Baker in Creature Commandos, and Idris Elba's Bloodsport. On the background team, there was Sean Gunn's Weasel and Joel Kinnaman's Rick Flag at the very least. Weasel drowned but survived. Weasel also has noticeably larger eyes in Creature Commandos, which might be an artistic liberty taken, but maybe the DCU Weasel just has larger eyes to make him a bit cuter than he was in the DCEU. It makes sense considering his backstory. Meanwhile, Flag later joined the main team, while Harley Quinn might have been there. James Gunn did a rewatch podcast of Peacemaker where he defined what is and what isn't canon. Frustratingly, there are name drops that they didn't talk about, like Joker, Mad Hatter, Riddler, and Harley Quinn, but they debunked the canonicity of Batmite, who was mentioned in the very same scene as Harley, so I do think Harley Quinn was there. She just might not end up being played by Margot Robbie, we will see. Similarly, Ratcatcher was referenced in a scene in Peacemaker that was pivotal to his dynamic with his father, specifically of the mention of Bloodsport's fear of rats and being on a team with someone who controlled rats. So we could assume that Ratcatcher and her rat Sebastian were there. The actress's involvement, however, is unknown for now. Steve Agee's John Economos, Jennifer Holland's Amelia Harcourt, and Tanasha Kajisa's Flo Crawley are all canon castings, whose roles in the movie are entirely canon as well. They were staff members at Task Force X who betrayed Walder to help the squad. Harcourt and Economos were punished with Project Butterfly, while Flo managed to get away with it and is now the director of the FBI as seen in Superman. The Suicide Squad certainly has many non-canon elements as well. There are actors who will be playing different human characters, and so these castings can't be canon, like Michael Rooker as Savant, Nathan Fillion as TDK, and Sean Gunn as Calendar Man. Bloodsport is canon, but in the DCU he had no involvement with Superman, since these events occurred prior to Superman's debut. This has been confirmed by Gunn. For similar reasons, it could be assumed that Mongal wasn't present because there's no way she's on Earth before Superman even debuts. Captain Boomerang might be in a similar situation. Gunn said he isn't sure if the Flash has debuted yet, as the events of Peacemaker Peacemaker, depending on what they end up doing with the Flash, Captain Boomerang might not have been involved. Superman is mentioned, he hadn't debuted yet by 2021. Kryptonite is mentioned, they'd have no idea what that is, even if it did exist on Earth, which could make sense. And if they did know what it is, there's no way they'd name it Kryptonite. Polka Dot Man hasn't been talked about, but we can assume he probably was present. Javelin was probably present, considering his javelin's important to the plot, while Blackguard, Savant, and TDK, without the latter two's actors in mind, can go either way. That said, Blackguard is a Booster Gold villain, and Booster Gold hasn't debuted yet, so maybe not. I think with the Suicide Squad, it basically boils down to the events are all canon, the characters and castings of the main team and staff are all canon, while the characters and canon of the B team and the criminals at Belle Reve are generally non-canon unless important to the plot, while anything to do with Superman is removed. In terms of doing a DCU rewatch, I would absolutely include the Suicide Squad. It would be the first project in this universe. It sets the groundwork for a lot of things like Peacemaker, Creature Commandos, maybe Waller, and there are only a few things that you have to ignore. Peacemaker is even more canon, as there is only one event that isn't canon, the appearance of the Justice League. That said, those events went pretty much exactly the same, just with the Justice Gang instead of the League, which by the way, this is before Peacemaker Season 1 comes out, so that's a complete guess, but I am so certain that that's what they're doing that I'm saying that as a fact. Not paying attention during those events, you can watch Peacemaker entirely as a DCU project, or at least that's true when it comes to the events. There are elements beyond the events like the dialogue and castings, much of which isn't canon, which we now know thanks to the Peacemaker Rewatch podcast. Casting-wise, everything can be considered canon except for Chukwudi Iwuji as Myrn. As mentioned by Gunn in the podcast, he doesn't want to consider that casting canon because he wants to cast Chukwudi Iwuji as a different humanoid character. Until that happens, you can probably just watch it with that actor in mind, but once he's cast as somebody else, specifically a human-looking person, that casting becomes not true for the DCU. This does mean that we'll likely never see him in a previously on segment to avoid that overlap. Since this is the first time I'm mentioning him, Jason Momoa as Aquaman, who appears in the finale, is absolutely not a canon casting to the DCU. The Justice League scene aside, the main bits of non-canon are some of the dialogue. Peacemaker loves name-dropping people, and over the course of the season, the following DC characters are mentioned. These characters have been confirmed to be canon. There's Dollman, and Phantom Lady also exists, so maybe he was a freedom fighter during World War II. There's Matter-Eater Lad, who is maybe a time-traveling Legion of Superhero member, or maybe simply a present-day anachronistic hero. There's Kite Man, confirmed to have fought Peacemaker and also confirmed to still be alive. Joker, Mad Hatter, and Riddler are all mentioned during Peacemaker Season 1, but their canonicity wasn't discussed in the podcast. I think those characters, however, can probably be assumed to have already existed by then, because, I mean, they are staples in the Bat Family Rose Gallery, or at least Joker and Riddler are. For Mad Hatter, you might as well just keep that canon. There are then a group of characters, mostly pretty high-profile superheroes, who James Gunn didn't want to talk about their canonicity, probably because of how important they are, and they haven't decided what they're going to do with these characters yet. So maybe they were around during Peacemaker Season 1, but maybe they weren't. This includes Aquaman, The Flash, Wonder Woman, and Green Arrow. What I will say, however, is that Wonder Woman, I mean, she kind of needs to have already been around, since just 1 year later during Creature Commandos, Cersei is an out villain, there's a bunch of Wonder Woman villains in the background, and Themyscira is a known place with a study around it. Wonder Woman, if anything, has been around for a very long time. Meanwhile, Aquaman, James Gunn said, is unlikely to be a famous hero around this point, probably because maybe he has decided what they're doing with him. While The Flash and Green Arrow, I don't think they've decided anything, nobody's written a script or put them in any script, unless they have, and it's being kept under wraps. Until all of these characters are mentioned or shown in the DCU, we don't know if these mentions are canon or not. And then there's Batmite, who is definitely non-canon. He may exist at some point, he may currently exist in the 5th dimension, but Batman definitely hasn't met him, or if he has, Batmite is not a famous villain. Obviously, when it comes to Peacemaker, absolutely watch Season 1 as a part of the DCU. Frankly, outside of the Justice League scene, it's way more DCU than it is DCEU. Finally is Blue Beetle, which is an entirely separate beast. Blue Beetle is getting an animated series set in the DCU that is meant to follow up on the events of the Blue Beetle movie, but split off from the story of the movie to tell something new. Zola Marduena is reprising his role to voice Jaime Reyes and play him in live action whenever he appears. We'll probably see what is and what isn't canon to the DCU from the movie in that series, but honestly, the movie is so removed from the DCU and so standalone that there's almost nothing that shouldn't remain canon. In the movie, Jaime Reyes became Blue Beetle in 2023, which in this unconventional DC timeline where Superman has only been around for 3 years, but Hal Jordan has been around for 30 years as a Green Lantern, there's nothing really wrong with that. Ted Kord and Dan Garrett were Blue Beetles in the past, which fits very well with the DCU's history. None of the castings overlap, and Planera City feels like it fits the DCU. The only thing that would need to be made non-canon are some small mentions and references. Batman and Superman were mentioned, which at this point should be completely fine. They both did debut at this point, but the Flash is mentioned and he might not have. Other than that, LexCorp is mentioned. In the DCU, it's called Luthor Corp. That is it. The only non-canon elements of Blue Beetle is that they say LexCorp instead of Luthor Corp, and then maybe a mention of the Flash. So with Blue Beetle, absolutely include it in a DCU watch-along, or at the very least, start including it once the Blue Beetle animated series releases, because until then, it's mostly irrelevant, although Blue Beetle did appear in a cameo in Creature Commandos, so I guess, from now. So, to recap, Suicide Squad for now is almost entirely non-canon, and I would not include it as a part of the DCU at all. The Suicide Squad is mostly canon, Peacemaker Season 1 is nearly entirely canon, and Blue Beetle has like 1 or 2 little references that aren't canon. Still, when it comes to entirely canon projects, the DCU technically starts with Creature Commandos, a spin-off show of a movie and a sequel to that movie's other spin-off show, which is getting a second season that is entirely canon. Kind of a mess, which is why I would include the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker Season 1 alongside Blue Beetle if you're watching the entirety of the DCU and you want all of the content. I hope this video cleared it up, unless Peacemaker Season 2 will do that itself, in which case, this was pointless.